Greetings everyone. I apologize for the delay. Like many of you, I was doing the anniversary event to obtain event items, but without changing the topic, let's continue talking about the tank role. It is one of the best roles in Champions Online and a lot of fun. In my opinion, it is more fun than both the DPS and healer roles for several reasons. The first is that it is more freely themed in creation. As long as it can generate a lot of aggro and has a lot of health and defense, it is primarily free in terms of build. In this video, I will explain the 3 main types of tanks and other important information for you to know to play this role well. Let's start with the basics of the tank role. A tank is very similar to a DPS, except it concentrates on defense and HP instead of focusing on damage. This means that a tank is set up generally very similarly to a DPS, except instead of maximizing critical and offense, it maximizes a stat called aggro. This is where mods come in. Aggro mods increase your threat according to the damage you do. There are 2 types of aggro mods, the first being Confront, which increases the threat from all kinds of damage. The next is a type of aggro mod that increases the threat of one specific type of damage. Confront generally has a slightly lower threat generation value than the type that increases a specific damage type. For example, if you use heavy weapon, that specific set mostly uses crushing damage, which correlates well with brute force mods. This will increase the amount of threat of your crushing damage significantly. In this list, I will explain how to obtain each threat mod variety. I specified the brute force mods earlier because the Might Power set is the most popular for a tank, specifically the Haymaker tank. As I said earlier, it is a free role, so you don't need to do that to make a good tank. I will help explain how to make a good tank. Another thing to note is that tanks don't need to be a pure role to work. You can have a tank/DPS or a tank/healer as long as the powers and roles are set up to work together. I only plan to help you carry your idea in a way that makes it more powerful. An important thing I didn't mention earlier is that there aren't aggro mods for every damage type. For example, I'm an electric tank, but there isn't a mod dedicated to that type of damage, so I must use Confront mods. Continuing with the subject of tanks, aggro mods are necessary, but there's another type of mod that is also required, defense mods. Generally, a tank uses 2 impact prisms, but if you have a tank created for 1 or 2 specific bosses, for example, Kiga, you can use a resistance mod for that type of damage, in the case of Kiga Cold or elemental damage. This helps increase your threat significantly by allowing you to survive that damage type better, so you can continue to attack more. This list is primarily helpful if you want to create a cosmic tank. If you want to create a more balanced tank, you should use 2 impact prisms. Similar to the DPS video, I will talk about forms. Unlike the DPS role, I would only recommend around 300 points into the damage stat and the rest into the constitution stat. The tank role will always have constitution as a secondary stat and generally strength if melee, or ego if range primary stat. Although intelligence has been changed to make a reasonably good tank, I would still almost always recommend strength or ego. In general, with whatever stat is being used for damage, I would recommend 300 or 250 as a minimum for damage. I say this more about the base damage from the form for the tank role because the tank is still close to being a DPS on that front. I want to mention this, but there are 2 specializations here I didn't show. One is Presence, which is for a healer/tank, and the other is Constitution, which is only usable for a dodge-based tank. From this, I want to bring forward the next most important thing to know: specialization trees. The Protector tree is the most crucial and mandatory specialization to have as a tank. This tree increases your health, defense, and ability to get healing, and grants the ability to heal with every knock or CC made against you. I want to mention this, but there are 2 specializations here I didn't show. One is Presence, which is for a healer/tank, and the other is Constitution, which is only usable for a dodge-based tank. I would still recommend Strength for a dodge-based tank, as it will generate more damage and help it survive better. I will repeat this. A tank is very similar to a DPS because it needs to deal some damage. The Warden/Guardian trees are what I would call my tanks. They have great offense, but in trade, they lack healing and are more likely to need a healer for most content. I won't say 100% of the time, but in many cases, they will need it. Sentinel tanks have less defense and offense, but focus on reducing enemy damage and self-healing. They heal by using powers that stun or incapacitate enemies in some way. It is an easy and versatile tanking style that requires protector/sentinel trees. I prefer this tanking style, but everyone has their likes and dislikes. I am making this guide so you can create your tank the way you would like it to be and be able to do content. Just make sure to have a good amount of offense and defense. I have provided some good specialization advantages in the image for reference. So before discussing passives, I will answer some questions about the hybrid role. It is an alternative role for tanks, minus the ats that need a lot of improvement. It provides extra regenerative ability, increased damage, and different effects from auras and some specialization trees, but loses some health and defense. Generally, a tank needs to have around 15k health to be able to tank a boss. However, the hybrid role doesn't increase health like the tank role. So if you have 19k to 20k health in the tank role, you will have around 15k to 16k health in the hybrid. Hybrid tanking is not recommended for cosmics. It requires mods directly related to the damage type of the cosmic you are at to be able to do it. The worst boss for this is Dino, though it is possible with the correct mods. I am too lazy to desire to get the mods. Something to note is I do not recommend the regeneration passive, as the more health you lose and the more enemies you take on, the less defense you have. You can never go below 5k health. Usually, the Devour Essence power serves to restore health. I do not recommend it either. The passives I show in this image are the ones I recommend. Please do not use regeneration for your tank or personal force shield, as they are extremely weak passives. Personal force shield cannot protect your character from certain damage types as they pierce through it. It doesn't regenerate quickly, making your character vulnerable fast, or in cosmics, always vulnerable. Regeneration is, as I said earlier, cannot take much damage, needs constant healing, and cannot provide resistance if multiple enemies attack your character. Well, I forgot to mention this earlier about the hybrid roll-to-roll is mainly used to make TT, TA, and Andrith Ruins run faster, as well as event bosses, since the format allows you to have a passive that increases either the damage or the resistance of your teammates. If you use Aura of Ebon Destruction, you increase your own damage and your teammates. If you use Aura of Radiant Protection, it increases the resistance of your team. With the topic of passives over with, let's talk about gear. In the case of gear, there is only one type of gear for endgame, which is Distinguished. I prefer the Speed Helmet for faster recharge of the ultimate in my build, but you can also use Efficiency that grants 8 energy every specific amount of seconds. The same applies to the gloves. I have my preference, but I'm going to show you all the options. This gear is farmed by doing cosmics for SCR and GCR. If you're going to farm that, make sure you deal enough damage for your name to appear in the score and above the minimum level so you can gain that reward. With Dino, try to be the baby tank while you're farming your gear. Otherwise, you have to be the soak tank that helps make the main tank survive the battle by absorbing damage. To finish this, I'm going to mention the secondaries gear you can use. I recommend primarily using OV, Onslaught gear, but if you want to get more aggro, you can use Eidolon secondaries. Although if you do that, it is important you have a power that applies Bastion. In any case, I'm going to end this video and I will leave 4 tanks in the video description so you can get a feel for how it works. One last thing before I go, I will upload part 2 for the DPS and healer video, which will explain things that I couldn't say in the first part, such as what devices you need for each role. I also plan on making a guide for new players to explain the progression of the different roles. With this said, see you in games, or if you just want a strong tank.